Hey everybody, Rob Maurer here to finally wrap up the second quarter. I think we're all excited to move into Q3. Looking forward to that. So we're going to go through my Q2 delivery and production forecast today, just to try to contextualize what we might be looking at this weekend when Tesla releases this report. Again, that should be expected on Saturday. Then we do just have a few other quick news items to go through today as well. So we'll start off with the stock. Tesla today down 1.75% roughly, to close at $673.42, trailing behind the NASDAQ a little bit, which was down 1.3%. We did have a few pieces of macro news today, economic reports, first being the PCE. So this is the personal consumption expenditures, not one that I look at super often, but another measure of inflation, just like we talk about with the CPI. And if we look at the core result here, which again excludes energy and food prices, the core PCE did continue to fall this month, up 4.7% year over year. So that did come in slightly below what the forecast was. And as you can see here, looks like potentially peaked back in March. So we've seen this the year over year changes here decline for the last 3 months in a row, which could be good news in terms of how we think about expectations for interest rate increases going forward. Of course, it's still a pretty high rate, so we're going to want to see that continue to come down, or the Fed is going to want to see that continue to come down, but at least moving in the right direction that they're going to want to be seeing. The other macro news that we have today is on the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, their GDP forecast, which we had previously talked about had gone from flat to up 0.3%. They've now revised their estimate today, and they're expecting Q2 GDP now to be down 1%. So again, if we head into more of that recession type of territory, I was having a conversation with a lot of people in the comments this week about this. 2 quarters of GDP in a row doesn't necessarily officially make for a recession, but if we do get that, there's going to be a lot of conversation about that and a lot of people referring to it as a recession. But we're, all eyes are going to be on that second quarter GDP print regardless, which again, we'll get the first estimate for that in late July. So kind of a couple things. If the PCE number is reflecting downward here and GDP is also coming down, both of those things would probably work in the direction of the Fed keeping interest rate increases a little bit lower or a little bit slower. But of course, generally, a negative GDP is not good for the economy, so you gotta have those things potentially working against each other. But something we'll continue to keep an eye on as we move into Q3 here. And then on the Tesla front, just a couple of quick news items to cover. We did have an updated note from Goldman Sachs today. Not anything too crazy in terms of revisions here. They still have a $1,000 price target on the stock. Basically, the note was just exploring the supercharger network as a business if Tesla were to open that to third parties. So we've kind of talked about that in previous episodes. Not really worth spending the time on here today. And then we do also have some news here on Giga Texas, which is pretty exciting. Tesla looks like they are in the midst of, or in preparation to expand Giga Texas already. There's an application here submitted to the Austin Planning Committee for plumbing work for a 500,000 square foot expansion for Giga Texas, which apparently would be for General Assembly Lines 2 and 3. So 500,000 square feet, Giga Texas is a little bit over 4 million. So this would be a roughly 12% or so expansion to the footprint there at Giga Texas before considering, like the cathode building and things like that. So definitely something to keep an eye on if we see that construction work starting soon. I don't know that there's any date. Obviously the application date was yesterday, but I don't know that we get a whole lot of other information specifically from this permit. So I'm sure the drone flyover people will definitely keep us updated on this expansion, but always exciting to see, especially because Giga Texas is already so sizable. All right, so with that, let's get into Q2 delivery and production forecasts. Just to kind of set the scene here, let me flip over to Excel. So just to kind of set the scene here, as we had talked about earlier this week, the consensus expectation for analysts that have updated their models since the news of the Shanghai lockdowns has happened, those analysts are at a consensus of 256,700 vehicles delivered for Q2. There are some analysts that have not updated their forecasts yet with that shutdown. Those estimates are obviously higher, and that brings the consensus up to somewhere in the 267,000 range. Fact set is pretty close to that. As of last update, Bloomberg is a little bit higher in terms of consensus. Those are what the media is probably going to use in terms of what is being, reported when Tesla actually reports these deliveries this weekend. So just something to keep in mind. Tesla, I'm not going to go as far as saying it's likely to miss consensus, but consensus is artificially inflated due to some out-of-date forecasts. So just something to keep in mind as we go through these. So I think most of you are pretty familiar with my production tracking spreadsheet now at this point, but just kind of a quick reminder. So we've got total production here on the left, weekly production, daily production to kind of look at rates, and then broken down my model here for Shanghai because we do get more data from the CPCA as we have been talking about throughout the quarter. So I guess that's probably a good place to start is with Shanghai. We know through May 31st, Tesla has produced about 44,000 vehicles, obviously dealing with those shutdowns. Versus the first 2 months of Q1, Tesla had produced 123,000. So you're losing about 80,000 vehicles produced there in the first 2 months of the quarter. But hopefully, and the insurance data that we're seeing coming in week by week from China seems to be supporting this, hopefully Tesla makes up a lot of ground here in June. So what I'm forecasting here for June is pretty close to what we have been talking about throughout the month. 72,000 vehicles produced, which would be a record month of production by a decent amount for Giga Shanghai. Now, I think the target, we've heard numbers from somewhere like 69,000 to 71,000. We've heard some weekly production rates, 16,400 maybe. I think that was from the Reuters report. So I'm actually expecting slightly better than that. I think my weekly production number here is 16.8. And my daily production then is 2,400. And I'm really just basing that off of, and I know I said not to overread into the insurance data, and I think that's true. But the insurance data has showed a little bit higher rates than this, especially here at the end of the quarter. And I just believe in Tesla and Shanghai to, if they had a target of 71,000, I actually think that they'll probably, I think they have the capability to exceed that, even though it's already an incredible number. So I'm going a little bit higher with Shanghai. I don't think we need to spend time talking about the model breakdown, but obviously that's going to lean heavier towards the Model Y. So I'm at about 43,000 Model Y versus 28,000 for the Model 3. So that's going to help margins. That's a little bit, for the quarter, we should see a little bit heavier of a split towards Model Y there in Shanghai just because of the production shutdowns. They're obviously going to be prioritizing Model Y where they can to capture a little bit more of that revenue. So that's where I'm at. That would put Shanghai for the quarter at 116,000. So a little bit more than 60,000 vehicles less than Q2, again, just because of those shutdowns. But as we talked about, making up some good ground there in June. And that's really what's most important because as we head into Q3, that June production rate, and of course, hopefully expansion on that June production rate is really what's going to influence the second half of the year, pending any other, shutdowns that Tesla may have to go through. So I think that's a good number. The other thing I want to mention, just kind of even before we get to the end of this, is that this quarter is kind of interesting. Not that the Q2 number is all that important in and of itself, like where we come in isn't all that important, but the number might tell us a little bit more than what we usually would learn because so much of this quarter's production is loaded into this last month of the quarter. So I think it's going to end up being, 45+% of the quarter's production is going to happen in June. And that means any small fluctuations kind of give us a little bit more insight into what the production rate going forward is going to be. So if we're sitting here and the consensus is, 256,000 and we come in and it significantly beats that, that tells us even more about the production rate for Q3 and how far analysts are probably going to be off for Q3 based on that rate. So point being there is that small changes here are actually going to be pretty interesting, even though the quarterly result itself doesn't necessarily matter all that much. I think most people are kind of just writing off this quarter due to the Bitcoin impairment, due to the shutdowns that we have had. So with that being said, let's continue on through the forecast here. Let me just show these daily and weekly rates. I think we'll close the daily production here, get that out of the way. All right, so the other couple of easy ones. So we've got Berlin and Texas, right? And we don't have a ton of information on these. We know Berlin hit that 1,000 per week milestone. We've had this kind of strange report from Electrek that Texas might already be at thousands per week, something like that. What I have heard, and this is very, very late breaking news here today, what I have heard is that Giga Texas has now produced 5,000 vehicles in total, so most of those should be within this quarter. I don't know if Tesla is going to be able to deliver all of those, but I think they'll make an effort for that. Again, we're talking about production here. I'm I'm going to assume that some of those vehicles were maybe produced in the first quarter this year, or maybe this information is slightly off. I'm just kind of hedging down a little bit, but I'm going to go with 4,500 vehicles produced for Texas in Q2. And kind of the reason I say I'm hedging down a little bit is because the VINs, the vehicle identification numbers that we have seen, those have kind of topped out in the low 4,000 range. So we've seen in the last couple of days people on Tesla Motors Club forum report VINs in that range. I would expect that over the next 2 days we actually get some that, hopefully go into that 5,000 range. That would give me a lot more confidence in that 5,000 production number. But I would say I'm moderately confident in this information that I've heard. So that's where I'm at for Texas. This is a little bit higher than where I've been throughout the month, which I think makes sense given the addition of the 2170 Model Y long range, the strange rumor that we have heard from Electrek that I'm not fully buying into, but at least have to consider, and then that new information from today. So that's where I'm at for Texas, 4,500. As for Berlin, also some pretty interesting news here. I've heard that Tesla is now able to, has been granted approval to sell those pre-production vehicles that they produced before they got final approval. So remember that was roughly a couple of thousand, and Tesla wasn't able to sell those in Q1, but now here in Q2, it looks like they have. So I'm not sure if Tesla would be counting that as new production in Q2, but I think they would have to since it probably wasn't counted in Q1. It's a little bit of an unknown for me, but that's one factor to consider on Berlin. And then the other factor to consider on Berlin is that I think the highest vehicle identification number that we have seen there so far be delivered is just above 10,000. So factoring in kind of both of those things, knowing that there was a couple thousand in Q1, knowing that the VINs have gotten up to, around 10,000 now, assuming that there is some skipping in there. For Q2, I'm at about 8,500 for Giga Berlin, and that has been pretty consistent again throughout the quarter. So no major change there, but I am hoping, I guess there is a possibility that this could be a little bit higher if all of that pre-production gets counted as Q2 production, because Tesla would have finalized it this quarter. It could have been work in process inventory last quarter technically on their books. So that's where I'm at for Berlin. And then we're just left with Fremont, right? So Fremont, it's always kind of a mystery. Really the only information we have to go off of here is vehicle identification numbers. It looks like those have been happening at a slightly higher rate than Q1. And we also get the additional day here in Q2. So Q1 was only 90 days, pretty short quarter. Q2 here, 91. So even if you just say, okay, let's add 1 day, you get an extra 1,500 vehicles in the quarter. Plus then, of course, we know Model S and Model X, we should continue to ramp those. So we've got 1,500 just from the day. We're getting, probably a couple thousand additional here from Model S and X. I'm at 16,500 versus 14,200 in Q1. And really, that's just attributed to continuing to ramp. We've kind of seen this similar pace here if we look at these last few quarters of Tesla, adding a couple thousand, maybe 4,000 or so on average over the last few quarters. So I'm being relatively conservative here, I think, with Model S and X, but we'll have to wait and see on that. And then for Model 3 and Model Y, again, just projecting some slight increase because Tesla has said that they've been production constrained. Hopefully as time goes by, they become less production constrained. And we've seen Tesla produce, increase those sequentially at a similar rate to what I'm forecasting here in past quarters. So with all of that being said, that gets me to about 133,500 from Fremont. So adding all of those up, my final production forecast for Q2 is just below 263,000 at 262,801. So that's where I'm at. And then of course we have to talk about deliveries. That's usually what, the headline number is going to be. Obviously I care way more about production than deliveries, but deliveries will definitely influence where things go from a revenue perspective and an earnings perspective when we get the Q2 earnings report. So as you can see here, the last few quarters, Tesla has been drawing down inventory. I think they're at like 4 days of inventory, which is just insane. The automotive industry average it used to be like 70. I think it's come down to like 40 or 50 days of inventory. Tesla definitely not operating in that same manner. Inventory super low, but as you can see here, it's it usually fluctuates over time where Tesla will draw down inventory and then it'll increase kind of just based on how the quarter shakes out. Because they have been drawing down inventory so aggressively the last 3 quarters in a row, it would be pretty unusual to see them be able to continue to deliver more vehicles this quarter than produced, especially compounded with the fact that they have to deal with most of the production this quarter falling in June, or more production falling in the last month of the quarter than what they normally do. So anyway, I'm expecting them to increase inventory by about 4,000 vehicles here. That's roughly 1 day of production. And then that would put my delivery number at 258,801. In terms of the quarter over quarter change then, that would be slightly down, 17%, but of course that is widely expected. I am still a couple thousand vehicles here above the most recent consensus. And then this would be what, even with all the stuff that Tesla's had to deal with this quarter, their most productive factory being shut down for about half the quarter, this would still be up 29% year over year compared to most other automakers, probably running down around 20% or so, maybe even a little bit more than that. So still, all things considered, a strong quarter for Tesla. I know we like to see the sequential growth, but we'll certainly, don't want to speak too soon, but we should get back to that for Q3. All right, so that's kind of where I'm at for the numbers here. I think that's most of the points that I wanted to make on that. One other quick thing here on production and deliveries. Let me hop back over to the browser. We just launched a new feature on ShareLoft today, so I wanted to just quickly show people that. If anyone is a member, they can go ahead and go to the analysis tab here, which is new, and we've added this little tool that will allow people to submit their forecast for deliveries, both for Q2 and then for the rest of the year too, if you want. So I think I'm at 262. 801, sorry, I can't see my keyboard for that, and then 258, 801 there, and then I'll save my estimate here, and then we'll collect them, we'll get a consensus, and we'll see who ends up being closest. So I just wanted to quickly show that here today. I'm excited for that, and there's a lot more that we're going to build into this. It's relatively basic right now, but some pretty fun functionality to come later on with that. All right, just a few other quick items for today. Let's see how we're doing on time here. I think I'm going to skip over. You may have heard the Supreme Court EPA news today. You can go do a little bit more reading on that. It's probably not something I want to address super quickly just because anything political obviously involves a little bit of tact when speaking to, but just as an FYI, the EPA's ability to restrict power plant emissions has been reduced today by the Supreme Court. So if you're interested in that, just an FYI. And then a couple of other quick items. Jordan at the Limiting Factor has posted the first video of the 4680 teardown from the cell that they have acquired. So I haven't had a chance to watch this yet today, unfortunately, but just from conversations I've had with Jordan, I think a couple main points here. He said that the cell is extremely thick, and I think it kind of makes sense because, the cells are now a structural component. So that was kind of one big takeaway from this early part of analysis from Jordan. And then the other big thing is that based on the teardown, he does believe at this point that Tesla is using dry battery electrode, which of course they talked a lot about at Battery Day. So that's new technology for Tesla. And although we don't have final confirmation of that, the fact that it seems to be used right now in 4680s is definitely a good sign for continued progress and definitely for the cost of the 4680 cell. So go check that out on Jordan's channel, The Limiting Factor. Then just a couple other quick things. So people have been playing around now with the Model S Plaid for a while, and today a new speed record for the Plaid has been set at 217 miles per hour or 350 kilometers per hour. I think right now Tesla limits the top speed to 175 miles per hour. So this has been obviously modified a little bit, somebody working around that limiter. I think they made tire upgrades and probably brakes as well, but definitely impressive to see the Plaid hitting that top speed. I think on their website, Tesla has said that they're rating it for 200 miles per hour. So Unsurprisingly, based on information that we have talked about before, the specs there being a little bit conservative in terms of that top speed. So really cool to see that. And then the last thing for today, just a quick reminder that, again, the interview from Jana Kreider with Elon Musk should be out tomorrow. And kind of on that note, I think what we're going to do, since we'll probably have the delivery report coming out early on Saturday, if we don't get any major news tomorrow, I'm just kind of planning on doing the next episode Saturday morning. So just like slightly delayed from when we would normally publish it Friday night. So we'll probably just do a live stream when those come out. Again, pending what news happens tomorrow. If there's anything crazy in this interview, maybe just hop on for a quick live stream tomorrow. But otherwise, we'll just expect Saturday. All right, so that will wrap it up for today. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you are subscribed and signed up for notifications. You can also find me on Twitter at Tesla Podcast. And we'll see you tomorrow or I guess not tomorrow. We'll see you probably Saturday morning for the July 2nd episode of Tesla Daily. Thank you.